In working with Considering Matthew Shepard, the piece that we are doing that is written about his life and death and legacy, it has been just such a freeing and healing experience for me to, to re-engage with the horrible events that I knew about, that I learned about when I was 16 when it occurred, but to put those in a more human context and to see both that Matt was a human who had his own aspirations and dreams. He wasn't just the way that he died, and his name's not just on a piece of legislation. He was an actual person who was having a human experience, and what his death and the wake of his death mean for us as a society. It is difficult to re-engage with the worst parts of the story, but it is also so encouraging and inspiring to see in the last part of the piece where it talks about what does this mean for us when something like this happens in our community to someone in our community. What are we called to do and to be? Being able to see such love suffusing an entire work about such a horrible event is really a huge perspective shift, and it gives me a lot of hope to see when things look absolutely bleak and horrible and these unspeakable things happen. This work to me points me in a direction of finding a community and finding a way to move forward and creating a space where these things happen less often and everyone is cared for. So having experienced Matt's death as a teenager as a profoundly negative, life-altering event, to now re-engage with it, 25 plus years later, and to have it be a healing and encouraging experience is truly just, I cannot even describe how much of a positive impact that has on both me now and the 16-year-old who was desperate for any sort of good news and could not find any.
One of the things that I thought about when I read this piece was that the lines begin with the word how, but it had more of a sense of when, kind of like, when will we let these things go? It has this feeling of exhaustion as part of this piece. So kind of how will we do this, but more like how long will we continue to do this? How long will we continue to have to carry these flames, this anger, this grief? And then kind of moving into this idea of like understanding that you never really let these things go. Like you understand eventually that those things will always be a part of you and that you weave them into these new beginnings, into this hope, into this new future. And I think that that is such a big part of not only Matthew Shepard's story, but part of the spirit of the piece that is about Matthew Shepard, is this idea that this grief never really leaves you when you hear his story, when you lose someone that's close to you. And so that exhaustion, that feeling of like, when will this leave you, eventually just settles into you and becomes a part of you, and it weaves into this newness and this beginning and this new future.
I first learned about Matthew Shepard's story right around my second year of college, right before I was about to graduate my community college. My theater professor, in his effort to recommend us colleges to graduate to, recommended the theater school in Laramie, Wyoming, the town of Matthew Shepard, obviously. And in doing so, he wanted us to kind of just know about his story and provided us I forget what the book is, but it's a play piece essentially describing Matthew Shepard's story and the circumstances that he grew up in pretty good detail. And I had never really found much community in the town that I was in college at that time. But reading through Matthew Shepard's story of ostracization and kind of just othering led me to really just want to revitalize the GSA that had kind of just been obsolete in my college at that time, to kind of get a sponsor for the Gay Straight Alliance going and kind of just revamp the club to be able to just kind of help out other students in the town, in that college, that might just need that kind of support, that might just help out people like Matthew or just myself in that time too.
Matthew's story is so interesting because it's super cool that we got to talk to his dad, and seeing a father love his queer son just so genuinely, it means so much, especially coming back from a time when that wasn't necessarily the case for most people. It's super, super cool to see that that love existed even before I was born. So seeing how far we've come is huge.
What Considering Matthew Shepard means to me is a great deal. It has a lot of various facets and a lot of emotions that are going to be brought out from the piece itself due to the story it tells about the tragedy of Matthew Shepard's murder and his death. But one of the hardest things I've noticed, both text-wise as well as personally, has been noticing how much I see of my own family in this work. Matthew and his family are from Wyoming. My dad's side of the family is from central Montana. And it is breathtaking to be able to see the landscape described in the same ways that I hear my dad and my grandfather describe it when it comes to setting what the world around Matthew Shepard looked like. But it also makes it so much harder because of the fact that I see and I hear my family. It's been one of the things that's been hard to process a little bit too, because some of what the poetry says of what it, conveys as Matthew speaking, I hear my dad. And it's hard to sort of wrap my head around and really sit with that knowledge and that understanding of hearing someone so personal through all of those words, through all of that poetry, through that music. Because there is so much that it is designed to bring forth from you. It is designed to bring forth happiness and sorrow and this, wonder with the world, while also recognizing how sometimes it feels like the world can fail us. And seeing that and sort of being able to reflect on my own family has made this both an incredible gift and an incredible challenge musically, as well as just on a personal artistic level. It's always something really, really challenging to have your family be something that you see every time you open the score, every time you sing, and just be able to recognize and feel every single description from Craig Hella Johnson in the piece and how it is exactly mirrored. And what my dad says about how he grew up in Montana, about how my grandfather talks about his own, stories of hiking and all of these stories of camping and just this wonderment at the world around you, which is such a core facet of the people who call Wyoming and Montana home. There's so much space, there's so much land, and it is one of those brilliant things to be able to see the natural world around you and both look at it from a perspective of, I am so small, but isn't this also a gift to be given to see all of this? And it is one of the greatest joys to be able to feel so connected to my family in that manner, and also recognize just how much Matthew Shepard was just like my dad, how his father was just like my grandfather, and also in a way how similar I am to Matthew Shepard. Being a queer person who has family from that area, who holds a deep-seated love of that area, and knowing the beautiful people that are there and the beautiful landscapes and the fact that you can literally look up at the night sky and it will take your breath away. And also recognizing too how I have been given a luxury Matthew hasn't. I've made it to 24, almost 25 years old, and Matthew had his life cut short. And so it's hard work balancing all of the love that I feel, both coming from the text itself as well as my family, and also knowing too that there are so many personal elements that are also going to be brought forward because of how similar I always hear descriptors being from Matthew and from the words from his father, and how those are directly mirrored with my family.
I really like this poetry because I'd like to think of myself as a writer. I've been writing from a young age. It was easier to express myself written rather than verbal. I didn't like the sound of my own voice because of like trans stuff and a bunch of stuff. So I've always been telling stories and reflecting on stories. And I even participated in newspaper in high school. I got to write about being trans, and that was really awesome. Yeah, it's nice to connect all of it to Matthew Shepard. Hearing about the news coverage his whole thing received, because when I wrote stories for my newspaper, it also received news coverage. So it's nice to hear that I'm not alone in that. And even though they were saying bad things about me, they said way worse things about him, which makes me feel better, even though that's really awful. I love the connection to the Midwest. I love the Midwest. I love being queer in the Midwest. I think we have to fight to stay here. We can't give it up to people who don't want us here.
The kind of story that I wanted to share was around the first time that I heard about Matthew's story. I grew up on the East Coast, and really conservative family, very religious. And so I did not know about Matthew's story until several years after I had come out and I had left for college. My first year in college, I was just introduced to this community that was kind of waiting for me when I joined the LGBTQ club on campus. And they had coordinated a program, and Judy Shepard had come to speak and share her story and what she was out doing across the country at the time. And I just remember as a young woman, newly out with slightly strained family ties at the time, I just remember being in so much awe of Judy and, you know, as a mom, taking grief and everything and putting it into, you know, making change in our country. And so I had the opportunity to meet her, which was really cool. And it's very kind of 180, 360, I'm not sure. But it was very surprising when I saw that we were going to be doing this performance for Considering Matthew Shepard. And I'm just like 15 years down the road, 15 plus down the road, retelling Matthew's story in a very different way, from a very different perspective, but also still so incredibly impactful. And I hope that our performance of this piece reaches more people. I, for one, benefited a lot from just knowing the shared collective experience of our community, and just how much impact we all can have when we join our voices together and share our stories.
Working on this piece of music, working on this piece as a mother to a queer person has been especially hard-hitting, but extremely impactful, and just recharging my desire to make this world a safe place for all of our children. We are all the sons and daughters of fathers and mothers, and we all deserve a right to be here.